Now, a few days ago, Robert Meyer Burnett, who honestly I didn't know the first thing about until all this happened, put up a couple videos or did a couple podcasts where he discussed the script that Colin Tevorrow and Derek Connolly had originally written for Episode 9, a movie that Trevorrow would have gone on to direct, until he had a quote-unquote mutual parting with Lucasfilm that stemmed from creative differences between himself and Kathleen Kennedy, at which point, as we all know, the film was taken over by J.J. Abrams, and for better or worse, we ended up with the Rise of Skywalker. And before we really delve into this script, or his description of it, since we don't actually have a copy of the full script or anything, let's talk briefly about the legitimacy of this. Is this real, or is this something he's made up and is claiming to be genuine? Well, as I said, I'd never personally heard of Robert Meyer Burnett before all of this, but after doing a small amount of research online, he has been working in the film industry for roughly 30 years, and has no doubt made plenty of friends and contacts in the industry. He also is or claims to be someone who enjoys seeking out and reading scripts, and says he's read over 1,000 of them in his lifetime, that it's even been his job to read them and give his thoughts on them. Also, for what it's worth, this sounds like it could have been the movie, though it also could just as easily be a hell of a fan fiction, I suppose. Either way, it wouldn't have shocked me if this, or something very close to it, had turned out to be what we actually got. There's also clearly elements of the real Episode 9 in here, meaning this could be the skeleton or framework that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio used for what we eventually got, hence why Trevorrow and Connolly got writing credits on the film. That usually only happens when some elements of a previously written script are kept. Long story short here, there's no way to know with absolute certainty if this is real or not, unless someone like Colin Tevorrow himself comes forward to confirm it is. So feel free to look into this more yourself and draw your own conclusions, or watch Robert Meyer Burnett's original videos on the topic, links to which will be in the description below. Either way here, for the rest of the video I'll be operating on the belief that this is the real deal, and though I'm not going to go over every single minute detail that he revealed, not that he gave a ton of them, his description was pretty vague at times, mainly I'll go through some of the more major story beats and interesting things he mentioned, and I'll kind of go through this scene by scene with some quick thoughts on my own mixed in, before in the end giving my final overall thoughts. Okay, so the first thing worth noting here is that Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9 would have been called Duel of the Fates. And let me just say that's already a much better name than The Rise of Skywalker. Because, I don't know, when I first heard that was going to be the title of Episode 9, I was left underwhelmed, I guess? The name just struck me as strange. I didn't hate it necessarily, but it was just an odd choice or phrase to use for the title, I thought. In fact, for the first couple days after it was announced, I kept calling it Rise of the Skywalker because the Rise of Skywalker didn't feel natural or didn't want to roll off the tongue. Anyway, Duel of the Fates is a great name for the final film in the Skywalker saga, I think. One that any fan is immediately going to sit up and take notice of, since it ties back to Episode 1 and the amazing and iconic piece of music by John Williams with the same name. It's so good that I would have been fine if the Episode 9 we got kept it, considering it ends with all the Jedi against all the Sith. A duel of the fates if ever there was one, even if it did play out a bit silly on screen. Next then, he has the opening crawl for us to see, which I'm not going to read, but you can feel free to pause the video and do that yourself if you'd like. Either way, it's fine, pretty standard fare I think. First Order controls the galaxy, they're not allowing communications between systems, and the Resistance is carrying out a plan to strike a blow against them. So far so good here. The first 15 pages of the script, he says, is then an attack on the Quat shipyards where the First Order is building their new Star Destroyers. How crazy that we actually get to see ships being built, that 1,000 of them with super weapons attached don't just randomly appear out of thin air in order to up the stakes of the plot. Anyway, Robert Meyer Burnett, or RMB for short, which I'll call him for the rest of the video, which I hope he wouldn't mind, likens the opening to the Jabba's palace sequence in Return of the Jedi, saying that the character interactions are great and well written, and that, unlike The Rise of Skywalker, there are no MacGuffins right away, or generic things that the good guys and or bad guys are after, like how it was all about finding the Sith Wayfinder device and then the Sith knife in The Rise of Skywalker. This movie would have then opened with Rose and a painted BB-8 on a mission to disrupt production at the shipyards by causing some sort of massive explosion to cripple production. Side note here, RMB said that Rose is not only front and center in this movie, but handled very well. We then are immediately given the sense that the workers at the shipyards are oppressed and poorly treated. Basically, they're like slave labor, and this idea of the First Order being oppressive and the people of the galaxy being miserable is a core theme in this film. We then move to a different part of the shipyards with Finn and Poe, and eventually Rey shows up too. Where she was, I don't recall if he mentioned or not, but he did say something about her being dressed up like a Tusken Raider at this point for some reason. Apparently, there is a ring above the planet and a long power shaft that delivers materials up to it, and the plan is to gum up the works and to blow up this conduit and halt production. At one point, Poe even says, "Let's blow this thing and go home," just like Han once said to Luke in A New Hope. R&B says there are a lot of such callbacks or fan service moments like this one, but that he felt they worked well and weren't too much. Unfortunately for our heroes though, the First Order is onto them, and the blast that was supposed to do major damage is instead contained and ends up doing minimal damage. Admiral Vaughn, that's a new First Order character, says that their tactics are old and pitiful and that the whole thing is basically a trap. It's then revealed that Rey has created her own double-bladed lightsaber staff, the colors of which I don't think he mentioned, and they all have to work together to escape the planet, and in the end they steal a new Eclipse-class Star Destroyer and get away. Okay, so my take on this is that it sounds like a fine opening. I like that Rey builds her own lightsaber that fits her fighting style that she apparently grew up learning, not that she just initially rebuilds Anakin's saber before finally making her own at the end of the movie. I get they wanted to make the ending of The Rise of Skywalker more dramatic, but it would have been nice to see Rey make and use not only her own lightsaber, but one that fit her own style of fighting. Also, I can very much appreciate the fact that this film opens up with a long set piece instead of jumping from place to place very rapidly like The Rise of Skywalker did. Star Wars movies are action-packed, yes, but never before have they moved at such a crazy, frantic pace. I also like that it's all about character interaction, as it should be. So far, this does sound like a Star Wars movie. The problem with all this, though, or what I think everyone should keep in mind here, is that it's one thing to read something or be told something and to see it in your own mind the way you want to see it, and it's another thing entirely to see how someone else executes it and brings it to the big screen. RMB even said that years ago he was able to read the script for The Phantom Menace months before it came out, and that he thought the script was fantastic. Problem is the script didn't capture the eventual tone that would be used in the movie, mainly how over-the-top Jar Jar Binks would be. Basically, he didn't envision Jar Jar being the way he turned out to be, and that had a major impact on how the movie turned out to be in comparison to the script. And so in this case, having seen The Rise of Skywalker already, and if you didn't enjoy that movie, it's going to be easy to hear all this and think to yourself how great it would have and could have been had it gone this way, when we can't know for certain how it all would have translated to film. Just something to keep in mind before we make any sort of final judgment here and say this is what Episode 9 should have been. Okay, moving on here, after our heroes escape with the Star Destroyer, the Knights of Ren, who are after Rey, arrive at Quat on a ship of their own called the Knife 9. They demand answers, and when they're not happy with them, Natasca Ren, or something like that, kills Admiral Vaughn for his failure. And R&B tells us that the Knights of Ren are or would have been well developed in this movie, and that all of them are even given names, unlike how they just are kind of there in The Rise of Skywalker. We then cut to Coruscant, yes, Coruscant, which is a major, pretty much primary setting for the movie, and it's no longer a vibrant, bustling planet like we see in the prequels. Instead, it's completely occupied by the First Order, and they've built their own citadel or palace there. The people there are also oppressed and living like scavengers like we saw on Quat. Hux has now proclaimed himself Chancellor Hux, and we see him having a meeting similar to the one from A New Hope, where he's discussing the state of affairs with many different alien warlords, implying the First Order has made themselves plenty of allies. All of them seem to be worried about Rey, the Last Jedi, still being out there and want to know what Supreme Leader Kylo Ren is doing about it, but all Hux knows or tells them is that Kylo Ren is in search of something of great power that will secure the galaxy for them. And all of this again still sounds pretty good. I love going back to Coruscant and was disappointed that the sequel trilogy never actually did. Instead, it just blew up a random new planet in The Force Awakens, that being Hosnian Prime, which a lot of people were confused by and thought was Coruscant, but it wasn't. And after that world is destroyed, we are just supposed to assume the New Republic utterly collapsed, and that the First Order walked right in and took over the galaxy with minimal opposition. But putting that complaint aside, next up we cut to Mustafar, where Kylo Ren is alone and searching for something. His face is covered with stubble, and we're given the impression he's been searching for something for quite some time now, and that little else has mattered to him. R&B tells us that the Force ghost of Luke Skywalker has been haunting Kylo Ren, and that Luke says to him during the scene that this is where the dark side leads, an empty tomb, to which Kylo Ren replies, "Where did your path lead you?" And also during this scene, and for much of the movie again, Luke shows up to Ben and is trying to convince him to just go home to Leia, that it's not too late for him. Kylo says though that he's going to be more powerful than anyone else ever basically, even Luke. He then, in Vader's castle I'm assuming, finds a Sith holocron and an image of Emperor Palpatine appears. This recording turns out to be for Darth Vader, and is telling him to take Luke, if he's able to turn him to the dark side, to the Remnicor system. There he will find Tor Valum, the one who instructed him. But while Kylo Ren is watching this, the holocron scans him and realizes it's not Darth Vader who it's intended for, and it blows up and apparently horribly scars his face, to the point where he's kind of looking like the Emperor version 2.0 here. And little spoiler alert, but this time Rey's not going to be healing him, and there isn't going to be any sort of Reylo ending. Okay, so the idea that Luke is haunting Kylo Ren sounds pretty good, especially after Luke told him in The Last Jedi, "See you around, kid." It does make one wonder why, on none of these visits to Kylo, Luke doesn't bring grandfather Anakin along to see his grandson, so that together they can tell him the true history of Darth Vader. In fact, just like with the Rise of Skywalker, Anakin never shows up in this version of the film, and I have no idea why. Why they at Lucasfilm or Disney or wherever seem so reluctant to bring him back and give him a part to play in the sequel trilogy. Also, I'm not really sure why Palpatine is telling Vader to take Luke somewhere to be trained. I get that this is an old recording and everything, and again, not a ton of details were given, so I can only imagine this holocron was only supposed to be watched by Vader if Palpatine died, that Vader was supposed to carry on the Sith by eventually turning Luke and taking him to the one who had trained him, which yes, it's supposed to be Darth Plagueis that trained Palpatine. We'll talk more about that soon enough. Anyway, what exactly happens in this scene and why wasn't entirely clear, but to me it sounds a little too much like how Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back and tells Luke to go to Dagobah to find Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed him. Plus, I just don't know how much Palpatine would have cared about what happens to the Sith should he die unexpectedly. I guess maybe he cares a great deal about their legacy after he's gone, even though Palpatine, like pretty much all Sith, want to be the last of their line and to rule forever. None of them are usually all too concerned about what happens after they die, because they see their death as basically the end of everything that matters. Okay, next up in the script, we cut to the Resistance base on a planet called Koreleb, where Leia is introduced. And let me just point out here that this script was written before the passing of Carrie Fisher, and the prominent part she had to play in this movie would obviously either have to be changed, or a new actor would have to be cast, or something would have to be done. Anyway, Leia feels what has happened to Ben on Mustafar, that his face has been messed up by the holocron, and she tries to reach out to him. Then the team gets back from the shipyards, and everyone within the Resistance is shocked to see the Star Destroyer they've stolen, which lands right on the planet. There were also apparently officers and a skeleton crew on the ship, and it sounds like Rey has basically mind-tricked all of them, somehow. The ship is also full of weaponry of all sorts, like TIE fighters, walkers, and so on, and they all lament the fact that they don't have an army or pilots to take advantage of it all. Then there's supposedly a great scene of Finn and Rey talking, one where Rey feels like she's failed and she can't be the hero everyone needs or wants her to be. She talks about how she has bad dreams every night and about this bond she has with Kylo Ren that she can't seem to break, that she still wants to save Kylo Ren or Ben, but Finn tries to tell her that he's beyond saving. But to that, Rey says to Finn, "Everyone can change, you taught me that." Next, Rey consults the Jedi texts and learns that underneath the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, there's an ancient communication system that's connected to some 50 systems, and since it's so old, the First Order won't be able to block it like they do all other communications. So the plan is to send out a signal asking people to come help stop the First Order. A comment is also made by someone during all this that Old Republic tech is better than the junk we have today, which would have been an interesting way to set up going back to the Old Republic someday, right away helping explain why technology was so advanced thousands of years ago, and why they're not well beyond it in the current time period. Okay, so quite honestly, this scene or plot point doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. At the end of The Last Jedi, the Resistance put out a call for help, and no one answered. So this time they're going to put out a call for help and people will answer? Not to mention, didn't The Last Jedi end with a bunch of slave kids playing with homemade Luke Skywalker action figures because of what happened on Crate? Wasn't Luke's stand in that movie supposed to be what inspired the galaxy to fight? Mind you though, the real version of Episode 9 doesn't exactly worry about any of that either, but for better or worse, this script seems to actually care about what The Last Jedi did, not try to pretend it didn't exist like the Rise of Skywalker. So I'm assuming this version of Episode 9 would have tried to explain why, this time, people will rally to their cause, and likely it would have had something to do with what Luke did on Crate, and why 50 star systems will make all the difference in the war, and why the First Order can't or won't know to block this ancient signal, but these systems will know how to pick it up and will be looking for it. Also, while consulting the Jedi texts, we learn that Luke has been coming back as a Force ghost and training Rey, and I do like this idea that Luke is a focal point of the movie, that he's trying to help both Ben and Rey, but obviously in different ways. At this point in the movie, Rey and Luke have a discussion about balance, and Rey says to him that the dark suffocates the light, and the light extinguishes the darkness over and over. How is that balance in the Force? Luke goes on to say, I know that anger. I had it. My father had it. Rey replies, I've spent my whole life wanting a family. I've got one now, and I won't abandon them. Luke says back, the Force is speaking to you. To that Rey says, maybe I'm not who the Force thinks I am. Luke then asks her, who are you? And Rey says back, I'm no one. Then Luke says, if you really believe those things, maybe the last Jedi is dead. And finally Rey replies, maybe he is. And a little note here, Rey does not end up the granddaughter of Palpatine or anything like that. She truly will end up nobody in this version. Next up, a disfigured Kylo Ren returns to Coruscant, and he has a Mandalorian-style helmet smelted for him, and quite literally affixed to his face. He then tells Hux that he has better things to do than deal with all the problems he's bothering him with, and that the ability to destroy a planet will be insignificant next to the power he'll possess, more callbacks to A New Hope there, and that he needs to wipe out the Resistance and leave the girl to him. And before he then leaves for Remdakor, the place he learned about from the Holocron, Kylo once again speaks to the helmet of Darth Vader, telling it that he understands now that he, Vader, allowed love to cloud his judgment, that it was his weakness and was a mistake he won't make. He then tosses the helmet of Darth Vader off a balcony and is on his way. And though R&B didn't make it clear, I can only guess this is the result from Leia trying to reach out to him, that it didn't go so well. Though he also mentioned that a scene of Han speaking to Kylo Ren was also going to be in this version as well, so maybe this is a result of that or both of these things happening. Anyway, right here I think would have been the perfect moment to bring the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker in, that after Kylo tosses the helmet away, after he rejects the last pleas of his mother and or father, Kylo turns around and there stands his grandfather, and at long last, Kylo learns the truth about him. But nope, again, Anakin was not in this version of the film either, even though, as we'll see when we get there, all the other Force ghosts will show up in the end. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it's really a mystery to me why they didn't use him at all in the sequels. I don't know why they wouldn't try to incorporate him into this trilogy somehow. The first 6 parts of the saga are all about his rise, fall, and redemption, and the last 3 parts of it don't even mention his name. It's so odd. Moving on here, Rose, Finn, R2, and 3PO all go to Coruscant to light the beacon, as R&B put it, or to turn on the ancient device underneath the Jedi Temple to rally the galaxy to their cause, or at least 50 of the countless star systems in the galaxy. And I guess we're just to assume that the 50 that were the biggest or most relevant back when this thing was made thousands of years ago are still relevant in the present. Also, I thought there was an ancient Sith temple underneath the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, that one of the reasons they built there was to cleanse the site, but I guess we'll just forget about all that. Anyway, while there, this group quickly realizes just how downtrodden and ripe for rebellion the people of Coruscant are, and they begin to organize something. Finn encounters other First Order stormtroopers who have run away, and learns that many more still are in the ranks of the First Order and would like to get away as well. No, Finn and all the others are not Force sensitive or anything. In this version, they're just normal people who overcome their brainwashing, and I'm fine with it being either way. I thought it was cool that they made Finn Force sensitive in The Rise of Skywalker, and of all the characters in the sequel trilogy, he might be the only one I'm really curious to find out what happens to next. Anyway, while that group does its thing on Coruscant, Rey, Poe, Chewie, and BB-8 all go to a planet called Bonadan in order to figure out where Rey needs to go next. And I think it's Poe that suggests they go there. I'm not sure why or how he knows where to go. I don't know if R&B said in the video and I just missed it, or if he was just overly vague about this. But they go to this planet and are followed by the Knights of Ren, and there's this huge fight scene where Rey is able to take them all out, I guess. They then find a mystic that can pull information from Rey's mind, and the mystic pulls a star chart from it that basically points to where Rey needs to go next, though I also don't think he mentioned why Rey would need to go there next, other than it's eventually where she'll meet up with Kylo Ren. Oh, and speaking of that, before Rey leaves for Bonadan, she has a conversation with Leia where she basically tells Leia that she thinks she can still save Ben. But Leia says her son is beyond saving at this point. I guess this is the conclusion Leia's come to after reaching out to him and failing to bring him home. The two discuss balance of the Force, and Leia eventually tells Rey that she is something special, something different than anything they've seen before, and that it must mean something. Also in this version, Poe has a thing for Rey, and after they learn on Bonadan where to go next, he wants to go with her, but Rey says no and even tries to mind trick him repeatedly, but Poe keeps resisting. It isn't until Rey kisses him and then mind tricks him that it works and Poe lets her go. And I don't really have much to say about this, other than I guess it was set up by how interested Poe seemed to be in Rey when they first meet at the end of The Last Jedi. Still, I think if Rey ends up with anyone in this trilogy, it should have been Finn. Also, because I know you're dying to know, I don't recall if R&B mentioned or not if Finn and Rose became a thing after The Last Jedi and are still together in this movie. Setting that burning question aside, while all this is going on, Kylo Ren has gone to Remnacor, which seems to be the site of an ancient battle, and Kylo finds the remains of both Jedi and Sith in old armor. He eventually makes his way into an old fortress when he hears a voice ask him to reveal himself, to which Kylo ignites his lightsaber and says, "I seek the Master Torvalum." The voice responds, "I am no master," and then this 7,000-year-old spindly Cthulhu-looking creature shows itself to Kylo Ren, who then asks if he's the one who trained Darth Plagueis. But the creature says, "That name means nothing to me." Eventually then Torvalum asks Kylo if he wishes to take his place among the gods of Mortis, to rule the galaxy without armies and spaceships, to which, surprise, surprise, Kylo says yes. But Torvalum says that Sith are unrepentant and remorseless, but that he is haunted by his past. He goes on to tell Kylo that the living force is nourishment, and that to take life is to cheat death. Kylo basically pledges himself to his teachings at this point, and gets trained on how to be a vampire, but instead of sucking blood, he learns how to suck the living force out of living beings. Furthermore, there's a scene mixed in here where Kylo Ren goes into a cave and battles a vision of Darth Vader, and loses pretty badly. Sounds cool even if we've seen something like that before, and I can only imagine that it's meant to show Kylo that he will never be, or can never be, as powerful as Vader. Sometime after this, after Kylo has learned how to be a vampire, he kills Torvalum and sets sail for Mortis because he wants that power. Okay, so there is a ton to unpack here, but I'll keep it brief because this video is getting long. First of all, I don't necessarily hate the idea of Sith being able to drain the living force from other beings. Hell, turns out Rey can use her own living force to heal others, and she's a Jedi. But it kind of conflicts with what Palpatine said in Revenge of the Sith, how Plagueis had learned to stop others from dying, but not himself. Does that mean he learned how to drain living force from others, but could then only use it to heal others and not himself? I don't know. It's certainly an interesting concept, I guess. But I think the oddest part for me is that Kylo kills this thing in the end. It's been here training Sith for thousands of years, and no other Sith before Kylo in that time got angry and killed this guy, or killed him because they feared that someone else might come here, learn this knowledge, and become a rival to them. because I kind of got the impression that Torvallum only knows the ways of the dark side and can use them to some extent perhaps, but that he's not overly powerful. I don't know, even though RMB went into this scene quite a bit, I still have a ton of questions and would really have to see how it actually played out. There's a lot of things that sound really interesting and cool here, but a lot of head-scratching stuff too. Then there's also Mortis, and RMB doesn't explain why they, and this is where Rey gets sent to, are both being sent there. Sure, if you're someone who's seen the Clone Wars animated series, you might be able to piece together on your own why these two would meet up on Mortis, but considering that, I don't know, 95% of the audience would have no idea what Mortis is, having to explain its significance would be a huge part of the story. I'm not saying they couldn't use Mortis, only that RMB didn't say at all why Mortis, what Kylo would find there, and so on. Maybe, or almost certainly, it would be in the script, and he just didn't mention it because he figured most Star Wars fans watching would just be able to understand. Anyway, the movie now heads into the home stretch, as does our video here. And at one point, after the First Order tracks down their missing Star Destroyer, thus discovering the hidden Resistance base, Leia seeks out Lando, who currently owns a burlesque-style nightclub. She asks him for help, but Lando basically says he's done with war, that he fought and won a war before, but it turns out their victory didn't matter, that he's happy with his life and his fighting days are long over, that he's willing to accept the First Order being in control of the galaxy. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, they all manage to get under the Jedi Temple, which is now being lived in by scavengers and such, and they activate the beacon. There's a scene of R2 broadcasting a message of Leia pleading with the people of the galaxy for help, which is yet another throwback to A New Hope. We're then taken all around the galaxy and shown many different people seeing this message, including the bounty hunter Bossk for some reason, who is living in the lap of luxury at this point in his life. And of all the things RMB talks about, the inclusion of Bossk seemed to be perhaps the oddest of all of them. Quickly though, the First Order is able to shut down the message, and our heroes are left to hope it's worked, or that it works this time when again it didn't work in the last movie. While organizing the people on Coruscant to rebel against the First Order then, Rose is captured and tortured by the First Order, but somehow manages to escape. When the Resistance fleet shows up along with the Star Destroyer they stole, their attack begins, and the people on the ground begin their attack as well. And unfortunately, Robert Meyer Burnett didn't really go into many of the details of the ending in either of the videos he did. He talked about how the end of the movie cuts back and forth between the battle above Coruscant, the battle on the ground, and the fight between Rey and Kylo Ren on Mortis. In the end, no surprise, the galaxy responds to the call, but he said that it was all the smuggler types of the galaxy, that Lando shows up with a fleet of them, including the aforementioned Bossk because reasons. The First Order is of course defeated in the Battle of Coruscant, and while their citadel is trying to get away because it can fly now, it turns out that when Rose got away after being captured, she managed to hack into their nav computer, and they end up flying straight into a planet or something, and that's that. The battle between Rey and Kylo is really not explained, other than him saying they can take energy from each other and fight with it somehow. And in the end, Luke, Yoda, and Obi-Wan show up, and again, no Anakin is there, and they help Rey defeat and kill Kylo Ren. Also, during this final fight, we learn that Kylo Ren killed Rey's parents at the behest of Snoke, which makes absolutely no sense at all if Rey is indeed no one. Because why would Snoke order Kylo Ren to kill a couple of deadbeat parents, unless he knew ahead of time what Rey would become, I guess? This is another thing that really isn't explained, and again, he really just sort of summarized the end of the movie, which I dare say is the part of the movie I'd like to know the most details about. But instead, that's it. That's how the movie ends, with a big battle on Coruscant and on Mortis, one that Rey and the Resistance win, and as far as I know, no one dies in this movie, or at least none of the good guys. And it's really hard to know what to make of all this. There's a really good chance this was not the final version of the script. Again, keep in mind, it's dated a year before The Last Jedi even came out, and the release of that movie could have changed much about this script. Also, Kylo dying in the end with no sort of redemption seems very bold, especially since all the Force ghosts, minus Anakin, apparently came back to help take him out. Though I'm going to assume or hope there's much more to it than that, which RMB just didn't cover, because if not, that really sounds like a horrible ending. I mean, I'm not totally against Kylo staying dark side with no sort of redemption if it's done right, but having all the Force Ghosts come back to team up on him and kill him seems a little bit off. I'm assuming there were some final pleas that were rejected, or something else happened in this final scene. So overall here, do I think this sounds better than what we got with the Rise of Skywalker? Well, in some respects, yes. I like that there seems to be a better structure to the film, that the pace doesn't seem to be quite so frantic. I think there's a lot of problems here still, but without reading the script myself or seeing the actual movie had it been made, it's hard to know if these problems actually have answers in the film or get addressed. Again, this is just someone explaining what they read in the script, and no doubt leaving parts out. For example, RMB says that the Knights of Ren are well developed in this movie, but only mentions the first time they show up towards the beginning, and then when they show up again and are all killed by Rey. That doesn't sound like much development to me, so perhaps he just didn't mention some things. Same thing with Rose, how he said she was handled much better in this movie, but based on what he tells us, I'm not really sure that's the case. We also have to keep in mind that, though you can sort of guess what length the movie is going to be based on how long the script is, when all is said and done, or filmed, this could have turned into a 3-hour plus film that needed to be seriously edited. A lot of this development that may have been in the script may have been cut from the final version of the film, and it may have ultimately had a pacing problem like The Rise of Skywalker did. We'll never know. Basically, to sum it all up here, with some tweaks and fixes, I think this certainly could have ended up being a better movie than what we got with The Rise of Skywalker. Mostly, though, it was just cool to hear what Colin Tevorrow's idea was, assuming, of course, this is all real. It's nice to know what we missed out on, or what bullet we dodged, depending on your point of view. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Does this sound better or worse than what we got with The Rise of Skywalker? And do you think this is a legit script or not? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.